we need to add in the buttons to make the game. So I am going to create a start button. And with this, if you create a button symbol, you can't add the button symbol to the stage. You can't instantiate the button symbol through code unless it's put into a movie clip shell or wrapper. That's just part of how how Flash wants to work with it. So I've created this basic circle. I'm going to fill it with something. Nice block of color. So then when I get a rollover and a downstate, then it will look a little bit better. So this is first going to be my button. And the button has my up, over, and down and hit states. Let's try that again. Hit F6. And then I can fill this with much brighter, richer color. So now that I have my button symbol, I'm going to then put some words next to it. And one of these will be my start button and one will be my replay button. So I'll be making both of these tonight. So after I've drawn some text, I have a button symbol here. I can just highlight both. And you could use the text tool and you could just create static text, or you can scribble it with the brush, which I like. I like that little more artsy, hand-drawn kind of appearance. And now this time change my symbol type to movie clip, and this is going to be my start button. Now to make my replay button, I can go back, drag out a copy of the same button symbol, and this time create my replay button. And once more convert it to a symbol. And making sure the type is movie clip, not button, because otherwise it won't work properly. And after that, you can highlight the two things that you've created on the stage, hit delete because we don't need them there now. We will add them through the magic of code a little bit later. Now, I realized I forgot to set up the linkage for my objects. Some of you may be working in CS4 at home, and if you are, you're not allowed to just type in a linkage name here and have it work. You can type it in, but it doesn't recognize it. It doesn't go, oh, you wanted that linked. Even though it shows you the box, CS5, you can just type in your linkage name and make it work. So to make it work in CS5 or CS4, if we right-click on the symbol and go to Properties, I forgot to twirl down the Advanced tab and say Export for ActionScript, because that's the little box we have to check if we want to be able to include our project through code versus just manually dumping it on the stage. So again, right-click on the object, Properties, click the Advanced tab, and then say Export for ActionScript, and then it populates it with your name in the class, and then that's what we'll need for the linkage name. And it gives me my usual definition for this class could not be found, blah, 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 blah. Don't show me again, I know. If you do more advanced code work, then that message actually starts to mean something, but for right now, it's not that big of a deal, so we will ignore it. Again, Properties, Export for ActionScript, click OK, happy day. So now those objects are set to export for ActionScript. I can get rid of the token one I left on the stage, save what I'm working on, and now I'm ready to start adding these objects to my project through code. So what we're going to first do is add in some of these new objects along with the sound effects, and then set about restructuring the code to fit into this state method where we have different states of our program. We have a start state and end state for each one, a start and an end for each state. It gets hard to keep saying that 10 times fast because I want to use the word state too many times. All right, so now that I have my project here, I can add those 2 buttons to my list. I can add the sounds to my list here in my variable section. I personally like to keep my variables organized a little bit. So I have object variables first, and then I have property variables second. So I like to structure it that way. Then I have the timer objects after that. And then we start setting values and doing some other things and we'll take a look at that shortly. So I'm going to add in my 2 objects that I just created and say var start button type movie clip equals new start button, var replay button type movie clip equals new movie clip. Oh, sorry, not new movie clip. I got carried away by code hinting. Replay button. That's better. Now, I'm going to create my 2 sound objects because I do want to get the 2 sounds playing within my project now, because I find that without the sound, it's just not quite the same. So I can say var pop object type sound equals new pop, and var power up type sound equals new power up. So I've now created my 2 sounds and fit those in. What I have not done is I have not determined X and Y coordinates for my start button and my replay button, and I can do that shortly. But first, we're just going to get these sounds playing so we can have a little bit of fun with the project. Now the sounds are triggered. One sound, the power up, occurs when the shield is turned on. It's a 2-second sound that corresponds to the display time for the shield object that allows you to saw through the enemies. And the other is the popping sound, which is the sound that the enemies make when they collide with the shield. So the pop sound is going to need to happen during the collision phase. So when the enemy hits the shield, it's going to play the popping sound. So that's when my score is going up. So what I can do at that point is say pop.play, and that will now tell the pop sound to play. So every time my shield hits an enemy, my score goes up, it removes the enemy, and it tells that popping sound to play. Under shield up, where I add in my shield and add the shield to the player, at that point I can say power up.play. And those 2 lines, the pop.play and the power up.play, will then tell my sounds to play at those respective points in time, which if we test it now, now I have to wait 2 seconds to get and you can see the game, when they don't speed up as the game progresses and only run at a consistent rate, it's just not nearly as exciting to play. When the difficulty factor ramps up the longer the game goes on, I find that makes the gameplay far more engaging. But just adding the little bit of sounds really does make it a more engaging experience. the next phase, now that we caused chaos and dissension in the ranks using sound, the next phase that we're going to put into it is breaking this into our states. So each state within our interactive, our game, or whatever kind of thing you want to make, needs a start and an end. So to begin with on that, I'm going to just start out and create the functions for each of those states, and then I will drag the necessary code into each one, moving it from its previous location, and then we'll be good to go. So to start out with, I'm going to have my I often refer to my first state as my initial state, but to match the name of my button tonight, I'm going to call it my start state. No, actually, I can't do it because it would be start, because I'm going to have start and end for everything. So I'm going to stick with my initial after all. Initial start. And this is a function that returns nothing. And I'm going to make these different functions. And then there will be an initial end. Now, once I have that, I can copy paste that. And then I have my game start. And I will have a game end. And then I will have a game over start and a game over end. So the base mechanics, the base structure that we're working with here is creating these different phases or states of being for our game. Each phase or state has a start and an end to it. We'll start with initial, then do game. Oh, it's not end, sorry. I don't know. Game start, game end, then game over start, game over end. So I end up having a start and end for each one of my phases. And then it's a matter of putting the appropriate stuff into each one. So my initial starting state is going to load my start button. It's going to put the start button on screen, and then it's going to tell the start button to listen for a mouse click. So I can click on it, which will then fire off game start. Well, actually, when I click on the mouse, it fires initial end, and then initial end will run through its operation and then call game start, and it will become a nice little sequence. And once you grow accustomed to organizing your logic in this manner, I think you're going to find that this takes a lot of the frustration of how do I set up my code, where do I begin with my code, right out of the picture. Because if we start out with the beginning part where you hit Command Enter and boom, your thing runs and you get to see it and you're like, ooh, okay. But that just gives you a little kind of piece of the puzzle. But when we look at it as a larger state-based system, we recognize that following this structure will work for nearly every situation. Now, you could apply this if you wanted to make an interactive web page or website with multiple pages on it. This same structure, instead of just having 3 states here, it could have an initial title screen launch of your site. Then when the user clicks on something, that wraps itself up, it goes away, and now it loads the main content of your site. And then you have other states within that, or sub-states, that are going to then fire off as part of your content. So this state-based structure is something that's applicable to a game, to a website, to virtually any type of interactive that you would build. So my initial here needs to add child start button. So now that puts my start button on screen. Then it needs to say start button that add event listener mouse event dot click, And this is going to be my and I'll call the function startClick. Now startClick hasn't been defined yet, and we will add that shortly. At this point, my start button is going to appear in the top left-hand corner of the screen. We'll address that in a little bit. First, what we're going to do is get the states working. Then we're going to make them pretty. Because I find that when you're learning, it's much easier to first get it working, and then you put in better graphics, you position things better, you make it sound better, you develop better interaction, so you build upon it. But you start out first with, does it work? And that's what we're going to do first. So this puts my start button on screen. So I need to find that startClick function. Now Flash is an event-based program, and those events then get kind of defined through the use of functions. So it may seem that we have gobs and gobs of functions when we're done here, but a function is a nice way to consolidate a cluster or group of like instructions. So think of functions in that manner as they're a useful tool for helping to organize things. And they're the base building block for most programming languages. So now startClick. StartClick allows me to then call my initEnd function. Now, one thing you're going to notice here is I go from my event listener, it calls a function. That function then calls another function. And that may seem at times to be a little bit overfunctioned, that we have too many functions, but there's a reason for wanting to do it that way, which hopefully will become a little bit more clear by the end of the evening. So at this point, I can just say initEnd and put that into my code. Now, initEnd up here, we can define as saying start button dot parent dot remove child. So that gets rid of start button, and I can get rid of, I can copy paste it and change the particulars, so I can say start button dot remove event listener. That's event click, comma start click. When you remove an event listener, it uses the exact same format that you used when you added the event listener. We just changed the word add to remove. Because we don't need this button to be clickable anymore, we removed it from the stage. We told it it's not needing to listen for clicks, and then we can fire off the next statement to make our project happen. The next statement is going to be the next stage, or game start. So technically, I could have put these instructions in my startClick function, but I did not. The reason I did not is I like to keep my function that's tied to an event, like a mouse event or a frame event, separate from then the instructions I wanted to call, because I can now call initEnd from anything. But if it's tied, like startClick is tied to a mouse event. So if I wanted to call the startClick from a frame event, it would fail because that'd be equal in event, not equal in mouse event. So this is a subtle distinction in an event-based language, that when the function that's associated with my event listener, it's typed to that kind of event. So when I try to then call it from something else, Flash will fail. So it's like an extra layer of functions, but now it means anything, anywhere can call initiend. And that kind of concept is going to become much useful as projects grow more complex. So initiStart adds my start button. Initiend gets rid of the start button, and it calls gameStart. Now gameStart, we need to do a number of things to have our game take place. We need to add the enemy container. We need to add the player. We need to add the score box, because there's no reason that those objects should be on screen yet until the game's ready to go. So they're all part of getting the game ready. So I really don't want to put them here, but I need to strip them from up here. And for that matter, these event listeners as well, because I really shouldn't be listening for frame events or key events until the game starts. So by leaving these kind of out in the wild here and not enclosed in a function, they execute the moment the code loads. If I put them into a function, they only execute when that function's called. And this is part of the organizing structure. So I'm going to move these commands here. So I'm going to cut them and go to my gameStart function and paste. So within gameStart, it adds my enemy container, adds my player, and adds my square box. Those are from last week. Then I tell the stage to start listening for my key up, key down, and my loop function. Then I tell my timers to get ready to start listening for their fun-filled stuff. So now we're making progress. At this point, through one more modification, I can now make this project take place. So I'm going to save this and cross my fingers it doesn't crash.
John, where did you paste that?
And we will notice that absolutely nothing happened here. So the reason nothing happened is we didn't call initiStart. So if I go down to the very bottom, I can say initiStart. And that will now call that function. If I test it this time, again, nothing happened. And it looks like this time I got an error message because I changed the name on power up at one point. So let me just fix that quick. And now it works. And we can see that the start button shows up in the top left-hand corner of the screen. So we will need to position that to make things look a little bit prettier. And it does have a nice rollover effect and a down effect. And now my game started. And oh no! Oh no! And I died. So an interesting thing happens when you try and do a keyboard-controlled game in Flash, and that is we need to tell Flash we want the keyboard to be focused on the stage. Otherwise, we need to click on the stage, and then it will start registering those keyboard events. The stage has to become the focus object, because if we look at the code says stage listen for the key down or key up event. But when I just run my movie, if I click on the start button, the stage doesn't know it's the focus. As soon as I click on the stage, it goes, oh, you mean I'm the focus? Great, thanks. make it take effect. So anytime I have a project and I don't want to require the user to have to click on the stage to get keyboard inputs to start working, we can put in one little line of code that takes care of that. So that line of code is going to be stage.focus equals stage. It seems silly that I should have to type such a line as that, but that's what it takes. And that makes the stage become the focus. So now when I run my project, hit start, it immediately is registering my keyboard events. And ending the game, before we do that, well actually as we do that, we need to fix something, because if I demonstrate my game here, hit start, now if you notice, I scored a point by dying. Anyone else notice in their game that was a problem and you're like, wow, yeah, he's really good if he can't make the game behave properly, and he talks, oh, the courtesy point, I like that. So if I wander down here in my check collisions with my enemy, I notice that I check to see if I should be ending the game. And these two lines of code here are probably going to be calling my game end. So we'll pay attention to those two lines in a moment. But then after that, what is happening is I'm also then finding out, should I collect a score? What I need to do with that is, instead of having two ifs, I need to say if the first one, which is when my shield is not out, it kills me. Otherwise, do this, which then that would mean my shield is extended, because the shield gets added to player, effectively making player bigger. That's what this hit test object is doing. So it compares the enemy to the player. But when I power up with the shield, I say player add child shield, effectively making the player bigger. So as the player grows from little to big with that shield, it's able to then hit the enemy. This line here is checking to see if the enemy is hitting the original small player graphic. So to modify this, all we have to do is say else and delete a few times to get that up. So we can say if it hits me, otherwise if it hits the larger player. And just by doing that simple operation, that means I will not score a courtesy point in death. I automatically die, no bonus courtesy point. So add in the word else, and you can hit auto format or you can hit delete a bunch of times to get the if up onto the line with that. So we're saying if this situation, else if this situation, which are the two events that are occurring with the collision. But it was this former, this stuff up here, that is going to be migrating itself up to the game end function, because we want to add up or add the game over graphic. We want to stop the loop occurring with the game, and then we need to put a few other tidbits in as well, but that's a good start. So I am going to cut those out of here and put in the replacement of that, I will say game end, and that calls my game end function. So I cut those two lines, replace them with game end. Now I need to go up to my game end function and paste them into that. So that now tells the game over graphic to show up on screen, and it tells the game to stop listening for loop. Now, I could also at this point tell my game to stop listening for any type of keyboard input, which would prevent inadvertent shield from showing up right as the game is ending. So when it ends and it's done that way. So let's test this though, verify it's working. So I hit start, move around, shield comes up, game ended. So, but if you notice, I can keep adding my shield. 2, 3, 4. So I really shouldn't be able to add the shield in death. That just seems silly. So I need to get rid of those. So I'm going to tell the stage to quit listening for those. I will use copy pasting as part of that. Change my adds to removes. And that should, I'll test it and then put the code back, die, and now I can't get my shield to show up. So I think that's better. That's a little more sound operation. The next phase is to help out game over, start and end, so those two functions don't feel so lonely. We don't like lonely functions here. We want them happy, worthwhile functions. So game end told the game to stop playing itself. I don't want the game graphics to go away. I do add in my game over graphic here, but it would almost make more sense to have that in my game over graphic. It kind of seems that tell the game to stop playing, and then call game over function. Then I'm going to add my game over graphic, which this week I would like to rename it as game over graphic, but we'll just leave it for now. Hopefully the meaning is clear at this point. I need to add in my replay button and tell my replay button to listen for a click. In the basic functionality at this point, I've added my game over graphic, I've added my replay button, and I have told my replay button to listen for a click. So I need to define that replay click function to allow it to work. And the replay click function is going to call game over end. So replicating what we have with the start click, we now have replay click. So in the interest of time, I will just copy paste and change the details. So function replay click calls my game over end function. My game over end function needs to remove the replay button. It needs to remove the event listener with the replay button, and a whole bunch of other stuff that we will get to momentarily. But I'm first just going to put those two things in. Option drag is a quick way to move things around. So remove child with my replay button and remove my event listener. And at the end of game over, I want it to call my init start. So it creates a loop. I end up with this infinite loop. The game ends. I click the replay button. It brings me back to my start button. I click the start button, and it sets the whole process in motion once more. So I end up with this perpetuating loop occurring within my project. So game over ends miserably because I get caught into an endless loop. So I click start, comes up, get a few things on screen, move over, game over. I click again, immediately I failed. So I can just kind of keep clicking and realizing that I'm in a perpetual loop of failure as they move one frame and then they're touching me, therefore I'm colliding with them again. So we really need to do a better job with housekeeping. I like having them on screen when I lose and having game over come up and taunt me that they touched me. I can see where they hit me. I feel bad about it and it reinforces that I lost. But after that, when it's time to clean things up before we go back to initial start, so at my line 73 right here, before that happens, we're going to need to put some stuff in here. So we need to start removing some things from the screen so that when I go to my init, it's clean. Well, one of the objects to get rid of is player.parent.remove child player. Another object that I might want to get rid of at this point would be my score, which is my score box. Now, a common typo you'll find when you're working with scores is you script the C and the O, so you'll end up, it looks about correct, but you'll get error messages and you'll be looking through your code going, where is it, where is it, where is it? So that's a very common typo, is misspelling the word score. Just a heads up on that one. So that gets rid of my player, that gets rid of my score box. My replay button is removed. I have not removed the enemies here. Now I can remove my enemy container that I'm working with here. Enemy container.parent.remove child. Now it's a good first step. It starts to remove the different things. Oh, I have my game over I need to remove. Now there are some code-based ways where you can get rid of all the objects that are currently on screen. It requires going through some loops and doing some more complex things, and we will have to employ that probably at one point. But for now, we'll see what happens when we try and do this. So I've gotten rid of player, score box, enemy container, game over. I believe that's the majority of the visual objects on screen, so I'm going to test my movie again. Hit the start button. Comes up. Now I'm going to try and get a whole bunch of things showing up on screen. I'll die. Okay. So I died. I should still have a score of 0. If I hit again, brings me to here. Okay. Everything left but start. That's good. Now, when I start... Oh, that's not good. Notice the enemy container. I got rid of the container with the enemies, but all the enemies are still in it. So when I add enemy container back on screen, all the enemies reappeared, causing me to immediately lose again. That stinks. So that needs a little bit of tweaking to make that happen. And there's also another failure that we're going to look at here before we do that. If I look at this, I have a score of 5. And we'll let a few show up, run into it. If I hit again, hit start. Oh, well now, never mind, I'm stuck. I need to reposition those objects really quick, so I'm just going to take care of that. Because the enemies are troubling us while we are trying to reset the game. Getting rid of enemy container is fine, but we really need to get rid of the enemies within that container. We have a method for cycling through the objects in enemy container by utilizing the for loop that we used in update enemy. Inside update enemy, we loop through the number of children inside enemy container, and then we change their position, we change their, and then check for collisions with them. So we can reuse that same kind of logic to get rid of the enemies inside enemy container. So I'm going to highlight these lines in my update enemy function. So inside the update enemy function, grab the four statements and then the temp enemy line. I'm going to copy that, and then, so I'm not moving it because I still needed an update enemy, but I'll move up to my game over end, and this is where I'm going to put in my section to clean out my enemy container. I can paste that. And then simply say temp enemy parent remove child and now that should get rid of the enemies within it. Now personally I would prefer to do that before I remove the enemy container. Remove the objects in the container and then get rid of the container itself. So this line I would prefer to see down here. That's a personal preference. It shouldn't have any real functional difference. But I'm using the for loop that I used in update enemy, cycling from the number of objects in the loop, and then setting my temp enemy object equal to that object and removing it. Cycling through the objects inside a containing movie clip or an array, which is another method of organizing and containing objects, is a very common task in programming. So anytime you have a list of objects and you need to cycle through it, a for loop is what you use. It's a standard programming construct. So now to give this a test, start. Okay, score of 8. Now I died. Hit again. Hit start. Oh, did anyone notice something happening here?
Your score.
My score, but also, okay, now watch what happens. I was moving down, and now when I hit again, my hand is not going to be on the keyboard. Hand is not on the keyboard. I hit start, and oh, look at that. I'm already moving still. So what's happened here is this has revealed a little issue. My character moves based on X speed, or player, I guess, not character, but player moves based on X speed and Y speed. Those numbers are set when I'm pressing the keys. When the game ended, those values were currently at 5 or minus 5, depending on which way I was moving. I think I was moving 5 downwards, so I had an X speed of 0, a Y speed of 5. Well, my score starts at 0, my X and Y speed start at 0, but when I press the keys or take out the enemies, those numbers change. When I start my game over, I haven't zeroed them out before the start of the game. So it's a very common technique to take these values, and I'll do X speed, Y speed, score, and ready, and I will set them all back to their default value in my game start function. The game start function is the logical place to do it because that's where I'm loading my game. So in game start, I can say X speed equals 0. Y speed equals 0. Score equals 0. Ready equals true. It's not an uncommon practice to just list your variables without values first and then you define them in an appropriate function. Other programmers like to, at least when they create the variable, list a base starting value, so that if you forget to add a value to a variable later, you don't get an error. I kind of fall into that school. But now I have set my base values so that when the game resets, it should start over. So, and now I will run up and die. Score is 5. I was moving up, so my Y speed was -5. I hit again, start, I'm parked, enemies are gone, score's back to 0. So that now has taken care of those issues. So thanks to some very astute detective work, we now know that the update enemy function is where we want to increase the speed of the enemies. We want their speed to adjust based on the score. Well, if I just add the score to it, they will start moving at an unbelievably, ridiculously fast pace. I want the game to last a little while. Just keep in mind, my speed is 5. So as soon as they get faster than me, it becomes very, very hard. So we need to figure out an appropriate factor. And when I was doing some play testing of this earlier, it took me about 3 tries before I settled on a value that I felt was decent. So if I have a base speed of 2, then I can add to it my score. Whatever that score may be, but I can do it as a fractional amount of that score. So I can times it by 0 point something. So I started out at 0.5. So that's 50% of the score. I tried that as a base value. And we can try it and see how that works, but it probably is not going to be the ideal amount. But we'll work with it in a moment. So this now means they move at 2 plus half of my score. So if my score is 10, they're now moving 7 pixels per frame. I'm only moving 5 pixels per frame, so that's going to get ugly pretty quick. But it makes it way more fun when they do speed up. So we'll get a few showing up on screen. I'll wait for it, wait for it, wait for it. And you can see that I killed 14 and I was dead. I could not outrun them even remotely. So 0.5 is too much. So I'm going to try 0.2. That seems to be a little healthier amount. Unless you take out, well, and you have to actually turn your shield on first. Unless you take out too many too quick. But when they start increasing their speed, it's very dangerous if you get caught in the middle. So you do have to be very cautious at that point. But I think adding the speed increase does make for a little more engaging gameplay. To add in the shield reset meter, the first step is to create the variable objects for it. Shield fill. Shield frame. They're going to need to be positioned with some X and Y properties, so I will need to put those in. Shield fill.x equals 200. I'm just guessing here. Fill.y equals 20. Shield frame.x equals 200. Shield frame.y equals 20. So I've created them, given them their X and Y coordinates, and now it would make sense to add them as part of game start. I'm going to put them below the enemy container so the enemies sit on top of it if they fly across the screen. I like that better. Add child, shield, fill. Add child, shield, frame. Now we're going to need to also remove them as part of the cleanup process when the game ends. It'll be faster to copy paste. Now, one thing you're probably realizing is that a lot of coding is somewhat repetitive, that you have to do the same thing multiple times. And that's when you start trying to find easier ways to go about doing it. And that's what often motivates you to come up with more creative and more efficient code solutions. So you don't have to, in this case, remove all of these different objects from the screen with very explicit direct names. So I added 2 new objects, now I have to explicitly remove 2. If I had a more efficient algorithm or process for getting rid of objects, I wouldn't even have to change my cleanup. It would just go through and blow them off the screen and be done with it. So as you get more advanced with your coding abilities, those are things that you look for. But for now, we'll leave it here because it allows it to be a little more concrete, a little less abstract kind of language. So I'm going to save this. So I haven't made them do anything yet. I'm just having them hopefully show up on screen. So I'm going to just do a quick test, and it shows me I have a typo on line 45, and I misspelled shield. And we can see that the bar shows up into a nice place. Game ends. I hit again, it goes away. Hit start, it comes back. So we're off to a good beginning here. Now, the way to animate this is currently we have our reset shield timer that fires off after 4 seconds, 4,000 milliseconds or 4 seconds. The reset shield timer fires. Something that we have not covered yet is currently our timer is only firing off a message when it's done. We want to have the timer fire off a message the whole time it's going and a message when it's done. So to do that, we need to tell our timer to listen for that timer. So our timer event, instead of just timer complete, we'll also listen for timer. So the way that it's going to look is we're going to say reset shield timer dot add event listener timer event, and now there are 2 events associated with timer event. One is timer complete. The timer event fires every time the timer goes through a tick. And it goes through a tick based on how many milliseconds apart you told it to fire. And it will tick off as many ticks as you tell it to fire, which we will revisit that in a moment. So I'm just going to start with timer here. And I'm going to have my reset animation. That will be the name of the function that we call, because then it shows up on screen. So this is a function that we'll have to define in a moment, but we have to modify reset shield timer. Because currently reset shield timer, which on mine is line 31, it fires 1 time after 4 seconds. Well, I still want it to be 4 seconds long because I like that. My shield's up for 2 seconds, then it takes 2 more seconds to fully recharge before I can decimate more of those horrible enemies that are attacking me. So to play with that, I know that I want to have my shield meter scale. Scale is measured from 0 to 1. 0 and then 0.00 or 0.01, 0.02, 0.03, on up until 0.99 and then 1. 1 means it's 100%. 0 means it's 0. And everything else is a percent in between. So when I have the timer fire off, I can tell my shield fill to have a X scale, or scale X, of 0. And then every tick of the timer, I can increase it by 1% until I get back up to 100%. So it's a very easy math. Now, this fires off 1 time after 4 seconds. So if I wanted to fire off 100 times instead of 1 time, then I need to make it fire more frequently. Well, the nice part is I can just tweak the math here. 1 times 4,000 is 4,000. 100 times 40 is 4,000. So I just change my numbers here. Say fire off 100 times every 40 milliseconds. That means this timer will still last exactly 4 seconds, but it's now going to broadcast a timer event every 40 milliseconds, and it will do it 100 times. And that works out to be 4 seconds. So I'm getting the same time. It just is now going to happen 100 times instead of once, and very frequently. Because 40 milliseconds is pretty quick if you have ever played with a stopwatch. So now I need to define what this reset animation function does, and we'll be in good shape. So I can type in, oh, no, I don't want to do it there. That breaks up my nice organizing of starts and ends. Let's go to the bottom down here. We'll put it after the clicks. Before loop, after the clicks. The order of my functions is irrelevant to the running of my code. So if you're worried you're putting functions in the wrong order, don't be. But if you do have a logic to the order of your functions, it makes it easier to read your code at a future date. So function, reset, animation. It's going to be a timer event. It's not returning anything. Put in my curly brace. And I know it's a timer event because that's what my event listener was. It was a timer event. Reset animation. And I get to fill this in by just simply saying shield fill dot scale x, the x is capitalized in scale x, plus equals 0.01. So that will work provided when I turn on my shield, I need to set the scale x of my shield fill to 0. So I can do that by finding my shield function, shield up. So my shield up function, which in my code is at line 1, starts at 167. Shield fill dot scale x equals 0. So that puts my shield fill to 0. And what I can do when that reset is complete, it would make sense to, just for good measure, to make sure it always returns to 100%. In the complete function with my reset shield timer, shield fill dot scale x equals 1. So that means when the timer is done, it's up to 1. When the timer starts, it drops it down to 0. Every tick of the timer, it goes up by 1%. And if our calculations are correct, and we're very lucky, you can see I can't fire my shield anymore, and alright, something's broken. It worked once. And now my shield won't go away. So we have a little bit of fix to do. I believe the one line of code that I need to add is I need to tell, before I tell reset shield timer to start, I need to say reset shield timer dot reset. So that resets that function. Okay. Now it went away. Oh. But it's good to pay attention when your shield dies. Now let's find out, did it work? Okay, I'm at 100%. Not working.